Good evening. The Supreme Court said no to the government and yes to the newspapers, voting 6-3 to let the New York Times and the Washington Post print the rest of the Pentagon Papers.
That's anchor John Hart with the CBS News report on the Supreme Court's 1971 decision affirming the right of the press to publish the Pentagon Papers. Their papers reveal that the U.S. government knew the war in Vietnam was unwinnable years before it ended. The dramatic story is now being told in The Post, the new film starring Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks and directed by Steven Spielberg. But the movie never would have been made without two inspiring women, a 32-year-old first-time screenwriter and a former studio head whose career at Sony was nearly derailed by hackers. I sat down with them at Woodside Press in Brooklyn, New York, where part of the movie was filmed.
This is a devastating security breach that was leaked out of the Pentagon. The most highly classified documents of the war.
The Post covers an immensely consequential week in June of 1971, when reporters for dueling newspapers were racing to publish government secrets that would alter American history.
We have 10 hours till the deadline, so we dig in.
The story of how the movie got made is a thriller in its own right.
I thought that I was going to write this movie and maybe you would get me an agent. That was my expectation, is that maybe I would get an agent.
Liz Hanna, inspired by the memoir of former Washington Post publisher Katharine Graham, wrote the screenplay in the summer of 2016, but she never expected The Post to be made. Then her manager leaked it to a handful of producers, including Amy Pascal.
I read the script. Someone in my office got it, gave it to me, said, I think you're going to really like this. I sat down and I read it and I bought it. And I loved it because it beautifully encapsulated a story of a woman finding her voice and our country finding its voice at the same time.
People are concerned about having a woman in charge of the paper, that she doesn't have the resolve to make the tough choices.
Thank you, Arthur, for your frankness.
Graham, played by Meryl Streep, faced enormous pressure from an all-male board of directors to take the Washington Post public, just as the New York Times published a blockbuster story on the Pentagon Papers.
The New York Times was barred from publishing any more classified documents.
When a federal court ordered the Times to stop publishing additional stories,
We'll be at the Supreme Court next week.
it fell on Graham to decide whether to allow the Washington Post and its editor, Ben Bradlee, to go forward with the story.
Do you have the papers?
Not yet.
Oh gosh, because you know the position that would put me in.
Graham would risk prison time and losing the family newspaper she inherited after her husband's suicide.
She had to take a very, very big risk, and she might have been wrong.
You know, the only couple I knew that both Kennedy and LBJ wanted to socialize with was you and your husband, and you owned the damn paper.
There's something that was really special about this decision for her because it was personal. It wasn't just about losing her company. This was about telling the people that she trusted most in the world that they were wrong.
We are extremely gratified from the point of view of the public and the public's right to know, which is what we were concerned with. It really wasn't ourselves.
What do you think it is that allowed this woman to find her voice?
Knowing the truth. Knowing the truth. Once she knew the truth of what was happening, she could no longer protect people. She could no longer not say it. That is the thing about the truth. It makes the greater good more important.
He's going to go this slow to here.
Pascal moved quickly on the production. Director Steven Spielberg began shooting last May, and the movie was in theaters by the year's end. Lightning fast by Hollywood standards. Why was there that urgency? Why do this all so quickly?
Because it felt like this movie needed to come out this year. It's just for a million reasons.
Did you have a conversation about that? Did you and Steven
We
say?
just all knew that if we were going to do it, the reason to do it was now.
How much were you thinking about the sort of political narrative of today when you were writing this?
Amy bought it 10 days before the election. So the reality that we were living in then was one that sort of existed before fake news. The situation that we then found ourselves in, that we've been in for the last year, I think has been a real reawakening for the country, where we have to decide what the baseline is of our morality and our ethics, and what the baseline of truth is. The story of the fourth estate and why free press is important, I didn't know that we would have to remind everybody about that again.
Katharine Graham would go on to oversee the Post's legendary coverage of the Watergate scandal and become the first female CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Her story on film comes at a time when Hollywood is grappling with urgent questions about gender and power. Did you see some of yourself in Kay Graham's story?
I wish I could say that 1971 was really different than 2017, but it's not as different as I would have liked it to be.
Yeah.
And I think I have been in that situation so many times when I ran a company and everybody in the room worked for me and they still weren't listening to what I said. One of the things that makes the movie so resonant is where we are now is a reflection of a culture of people who don't speak up. And I think that what it starts with someone like Kay finding her voice and saying what she wants and what she thinks. That's what's going to change everything.
The Post was nominated for 6 Golden Globes, but it's the Time's Up movement that dominated the award ceremony. It is the best of times and the worst of times when it comes to gender in Hollywood, right? Does it feel like something is happening? Is there a renewed sense of purpose about what kind of films are getting made, or is it more subtle than that?
I don't think that we've seen like the kind of movies that are getting made reflected yet. I think it's been 4 seconds, but I think it will. You know, you had 2 women producing this movie, you had a woman writing this movie, it's about a woman.
I'm asking your advice, Bob, not your permission.
I think there will be more movies with female protagonists. I think we'll see that.
What will happen if we don't publish? What are you going to do, Mrs. Graham?
It was incredibly prescient to buy that movie last year, but with all the conversations happening about gender and power, the press, fake news, government secrets, I mean, it could not be coming out at a more opportune time. The fact that this movie was made in less than a year
is astounding.
It's astounding. If you know anything about Hollywood, it never happens like that.
And Katharine Graham was a giant.